At my brother's wedding, he thought it would be funny to roast me in front of everyone, mocking my failed career. But the moment his boss called me madam, everything flipped upside down. Stay with me as I walk you through this story. And if it moves you, please remember to support our channel by subscribing, leaving a like, and sharing it with those close to you. My name is Evelyn, and for most of my life, I've been the quiet one in the family. I worked hard, stayed out of drama, and tried to build something meaningful for myself. But my younger brother, Thomas, always overshadowed me. He was the golden child, loud, confident, arrogant, the kind of person who thought the world revolved around him. Our parents adored him, praised him for the smallest things, and overlooked the fact that most of his success came from connections, not actual talent. I, on the other hand, was often dismissed, treated like I wasn't going to amount to anything. On the day of his wedding, I showed up in a simple gown. Nothing flashy, nothing loud. I wasn't there for the spotlight. I just wanted to celebrate quietly, keep my head down, and avoid any drama. I sat at a corner table, away from the chatter, sipping water and watching the night unfold. Then Thomas took the microphone for his toast. I already knew what was coming. He always loved using me as the punchline for his jokes. He laughed as he told the crowd. And of course, let's give it up for my sister Evelyn, still figuring out what she wants to do with her life. Last I heard, she was freelancing from coffee shops, living the dream. The room erupted in laughter. Some laughed politely, others joined in with cruel chuckles. My parents smiled weakly, as if it was harmless fun. But I felt the sting in my chest. I wanted to sink into the floor, to disappear before more eyes turned to me. My cheeks burned, but I kept my face calm. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. Then something happened that no one in that room expected. Richard Hale, Thomas's boss and the CEO of one of the most respected firms in the city, walked over. He didn't even glance at Thomas. Instead, he came straight to me, offered his hand with a warm smile, and said, "Madam Evelyn, it's been too long. I'm honored to see you here." The entire room went silent. Forks froze in midair, whispers buzzed from table to table. Thomas stood stiff, his grin wiped off instantly. Guests looked between me and Richard, confused and stunned. I simply smiled, nodded politely, and shook Richard's hand. For the first time that evening, I felt the power shift. The same people who laughed at me a minute earlier now stared in disbelief. And Thomas, he was speechless. When I think back to my childhood, it's easy to see how the story was already written long before that wedding night. I was the quiet child, the one who listened more than I spoke, the one who spent hours reading, drawing, and dreaming of building something that would outlast me. I loved working with my hands, sketching designs, and imagining structures that could shape the future. But in my family, none of that seemed to matter. My brother, Thomas, was the shining star. From the moment he could walk, it felt like our parents, Margaret and David, saw him as their golden child. If Thomas so much as brought home a scribbled drawing from school, it was framed on the fridge with pride. When I came home with a first-place medal in a math competition, my father shrugged and said, "That's nice, Evelyn. But you know, numbers don't make people successful. Confidence does. Look at Thomas. Confidence. That was their word for him." I saw it differently. To me, Thomas wasn't confident, he was spoiled. He never faced consequences for his mistakes. If he forgot homework, teachers were blamed. If he broke something in the house, I was scolded for not watching out for him. He grew up learning that the world would bend for him, while I grew up learning to bend myself to survive. I remember one summer when I was 14, working part-time at the library to save up for extra classes in design. Every day I'd come home exhausted, but happy that I was inching toward my dream. One evening, Thomas boasted at the dinner table about getting a summer allowance from Dad for helping out in the garage. His help was sitting on his phone while Dad fixed the car. My mother clapped for him, praising his work ethic, and then turned to me with, "Evelyn, you spend too much time with books. You should be more like your brother." It wasn't just words, it was the silence too. When Thomas mocked me, calling me a nerd or saying I'd end up designing dollhouses, my parents never corrected him. They laughed along sometimes, brushing it off as sibling teasing. But every laugh carved a deeper cut into me. So I worked harder. I told myself that one day, I would prove them wrong. While Thomas breezed through school without lifting a finger, I stayed up late, studying, sketching, planning. While he boasted about parties and friends, I quietly earned scholarships. But no matter what I achieved, it never seemed enough to them. Those years planted the resentment deep inside me. Not the kind that explodes, but the kind that hardens. I learned to endure quietly, to hold my ambitions close to my chest like secrets no one else deserved to know. And maybe that's why, when the moment finally came years later, the shock on their faces was so sweet. They never saw me coming. After finishing school, I knew exactly what I wanted to do, even if no one else believed in me. Architecture wasn't just a career path to me. It was the only thing that made sense. I loved the way ideas on paper could turn into walls and ceilings, places where people would live their lives. But the moment I told my family about it, I was met with blank stares and half smiles. My father said it was too ambitious. My mother told me to pick something realistic. And Thomas, of course, laughed the loudest. Architecture? Please, he sneered one evening. You'll end up sketching birdhouses and calling it art. Stop pretending like it's a career. Those words stuck to me like mud, but I refused to let them bury me. I scraped together every bit of money I had and applied to programs, took classes, and worked part-time jobs to keep myself afloat. There were nights I barely slept, nights I stared at my bank account wondering how I would make it through the next month. But no matter how tight things got, I didn't quit. Still, the weight of discouragement pressed down harder than any financial struggle. My parents never asked how my projects were going. At family dinners, when Thomas bragged about his latest promotion or purchase, my achievements were ignored. If I tried to share even a small success, my father would cut me off with, "That's nice, Evelyn, but maybe you should think about getting a steady job." It was like shouting into a void that swallowed every word. So I stopped talking about it. I learned to keep my dreams private, to let the work speak for me instead. I poured everything I had into my projects, working from small apartments, coffee shops, and borrowed studio spaces. Slowly, painfully, things began to change. One small client led to another. A cafe owner who needed a redesign. A boutique hotel looking for fresh ideas. Word of mouth started spreading in circles I never imagined I'd reach. I didn't advertise, I didn't show off online. I let the results do the talking. And quietly, my portfolio grew. The turning point came when one of my designs caught the attention of someone who worked closely with Richard Hale, the CEO of a massive development firm. At first, I thought it was a scam when they reached out. But within weeks, I found myself in meetings, presenting designs that would shape entire city projects. It was surreal, me, the forgotten daughter, sitting across from one of the most powerful men in the industry, and hearing him say, "You've got vision. We need people like you." I kept it all confidential. My name was on the contracts, but I didn't tell my family. I didn't want their doubts tainting what I was building. While Thomas and my parents saw me as a struggling dropout, I was quietly laying the foundation of my own design firm, with clients most people could only dream of. And that secrecy, my silence, would become the sharpest blade of all when the truth finally surfaced. Thomas's life moved like a breeze, but not because he worked harder or because he was smarter. It was because everything was handed to him. While I was up at 3 a.m. sketching designs under the dim light of my desk lamp, Thomas was out drinking with his friends, bragging about the job he had just landed. Of course, it wasn't really his achievement. A family friend pulled strings, made a few calls, and just like that, Thomas walked into a position most people would have fought years to earn. But Thomas didn't just take the opportunity. He wore it like a crown. Within weeks, he was flashing photos of his office, his brand new car, his expensive suits that he could barely afford but bought anyway to look the part. He was surrounded by shallow friends who only stuck around because he was loud and generous when he wanted attention. I watched it all from the background, silent, knowing he hadn't earned a single thing he flaunted. When he got engaged to Rachel, it felt like his ego doubled overnight. Rachel was charming, sweet, and at first glance, seemed completely taken by Thomas's bold confidence. She admired his ability to command a room, the way he seemed sure of himself at every turn. But it didn't take long before she noticed the cracks in that act, especially when it came to me. I could see the flicker in her eyes, the discomfort, whenever Thomas went too far in his treatment of me. Because he did. Constantly. Family dinners turned into his stage. He made sure my seat at the table was his target. He would lean back in his chair, smirk, and say things like, "So, Evelyn, still playing pretend with your art projects? When are you going to get a real job?" He would say it with a laugh, nudging Rachel or my parents as if it were all in good fun. My mother would chuckle softly, my father would smile in that dismissive way, and Rachel would force a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Every jab felt like a needle, but what hurt more wasn't Thomas. It was the silence of my parents. They never defended me. Not once. Sometimes they even encouraged him, laughing along or changing the subject without acknowledging the sting of his words. They were so invested in protecting his image as the golden son that they left me to absorb the humiliation alone. I learned to sit still, to hold my expression neutral as Thomas basked in the attention. He loved the spotlight, loved the sound of people laughing at his jokes, especially when they came at my expense. He thought it made him look bigger, stronger, more successful. What he never realized was that every insult, every smug laugh, was building something inside me, something far stronger than his shallow arrogance. He thought he was putting me down, but all he was really doing was setting the stage for the day when the truth would finally break him. The invitation to Thomas's wedding sat on my dresser for weeks, unopened, gathering dust. I knew exactly what it would say, exactly what it would ask of me, and I had no desire to put myself through another evening where I'd be nothing more than the target of Thomas's jokes. Memories of family dinners where I was humiliated still echoed in my mind, and the thought of walking into a room full of relatives who never respected me made my stomach twist. I told myself I wouldn't go. I owed Thomas nothing. But then Rachel called. Her voice was soft, almost pleading. "Evelyn, please come. I know things with Thomas haven't been good, but you're still family. It would mean a lot to me if you were there." I could hear the sincerity in her tone, the way she wanted to bridge a gap that had existed for years. And though I didn't want to admit it, I had always liked Rachel. She treated me with kindness when no one else did. So I agreed, not for Thomas, not for my parents, but for her. I told myself it would just be one night, that I could keep my head down, smile politely, and slip out when no one was watching. I steeled myself for whatever Thomas might throw my way. If there was one thing I could count on, it was his need to humiliate me in front of a crowd. When the day came, I chose my dress carefully. It wasn't extravagant, but it carried a quiet grace, simple fabric, soft lines, nothing flashy. I didn't want attention. I wanted to blend into the background. I pulled my hair back, added a touch of makeup, and stared at my reflection. I looked composed, calm, but beneath that surface, my heart was heavy. The moment I arrived at the venue, I could feel the eyes on me. Aunts whispering behind delicate fans, cousins glancing and then looking away quickly, uncles smirking as though my presence was some kind of joke. Their murmurs carried the same tired doubts. What has she done with her life? Why is she even here? I kept walking, spine straight, refusing to let their words break through the walls I had built around myself. The hall was beautiful, flowers draped across the ceiling, soft music filling the air, the kind of perfection Thomas would want to flaunt. I found a seat at the far end of the room, away from the clusters of laughter and chatter. I folded my hands in my lap and told myself to breathe. I watched Rachel float down the aisle, radiant and glowing, and I felt glad I had come, if only to see her happiness. But even as I smiled faintly for her, I knew deep down that Thomas wouldn't let the night pass quietly. He thrived on spectacle, and I was certain that at some point, his attention would turn to me. And when it did, I promised myself I would be ready. The reception was glowing with laughter, music, and the clinking of glasses. People moved from table to table, congratulating Thomas and Rachel, their smiles as wide as the sparkling chandeliers above. I sat quietly in my corner, eating little, speaking even less, doing what I always did at family events, existing in the background. For most of the evening, I managed to stay invisible, and for a while, I thought maybe I would escape unscathed. But then Thomas stood up for his speech. He grabbed the microphone with the same arrogant swagger he had worn all his life, grinning like the king of the room. "First of all," he began, "thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate with us. It means the world." His words drew warm applause. Rachel smiled at him from her seat, though I noticed her hands nervously twisting the hem of her dress. It didn't take long for him to shift from charming to cruel. "And of course," he continued, scanning the room with a smirk, "we can't forget my dear sister Evelyn. She's here tonight, bless her heart, still trying to figure out what she wants to do with her life." His voice dripped with mockery, his tone rising with satisfaction as the room erupted into awkward laughter. He wasn't done. "I mean, last I heard," he said, pausing for dramatic effect, "she was freelancing from coffee shops, living off Wi-Fi and side gigs. Talk about chasing dreams, huh?" This time the laughter was sharper, meaner. Some guests laughed nervously, clearly uncomfortable, but others leaned into the cruelty, chuckling openly, glancing in my direction as if I were part of the entertainment. My chest tightened. I sat frozen in my chair, every muscle stiff, nails digging into my palm under the table. Rage boiled inside me, a wave so hot I thought it might burn straight through my skin. And yet, on the outside, I stayed calm. My face remained unreadable, my lips fixed in a neutral line. I refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing me break, of watching me crumble in front of all those eyes. I shifted slightly, catching my parents' expressions. My mother was smiling faintly, my father chuckled along with the rest, as though this public humiliation was nothing more than playful banter. Their complicity stung more than the laughter. It told me everything I already knew, that in their eyes Thomas could do no wrong, and I would always be the expendable one. But not everyone found it funny. My eyes flicked to Rachel. She wasn't laughing. She wasn't smiling. She sat still, her face pale, her lips pressed tightly together. Her gaze dropped to the table, and in that silence, I knew she didn't approve of what he'd done. Thomas, though, basked in the spotlight, grinning at the applause like it was his crowning moment. He thought he had won. He didn't realize that the room's laughter was only temporary, and that very soon, the balance of power would shift. Dinner plates clinked as servers moved between tables, pouring wine and clearing away empty dishes. The laughter from Thomas's speech still lingered faintly, though it had settled into scattered conversations and murmurs. I sat still, my face calm, though my insides were tight with the heat of humiliation. I wanted nothing more than to disappear. And then, almost like the universe had been holding its breath, the room shifted. The doors at the back opened, and in walked Richard Hale, the CEO of one of the most powerful development firms in the country, and Thomas's boss. His presence immediately commanded attention. Conversations hushed, eyes turned, and even Thomas straightened a little taller, eager to impress. But Richard wasn't scanning the room for Thomas. His gaze locked on me. I blinked, uncertain at first, until he began striding directly toward my table. Guests followed his movement with curious eyes, expecting him to approach the groom. But instead he stopped right in front of me. His face broke into a warm smile. "Madam Evelyn," he said, extending his hand with genuine respect. "What a pleasant surprise to see you here." The room gasped collectively. Forks froze midair, glasses hovered halfway to lips. People glanced at one another, whispering, confused. And then, slowly, all eyes turned to Thomas, who stood frozen, his grin sliding off his face like melting wax. I rose from my chair gracefully and shook Richard's hand. "Mr. Hale," I replied softly, "it's good to see you again." Richard chuckled warmly, as though I were an old friend rather than some obscure relative hiding in the background. "Good. Evelyn, you've been leading some of the most brilliant projects my firm has ever taken on. Your designs are breathtaking. You've completely transformed how we approach modern spaces." His words carried across the room, each one landing like a stone dropped in water, rippling outward into silence and stunned faces. I could feel the stares burning into me. Cousins who had whispered doubts earlier now gawked with disbelief. My parents sat rigid, eyes wide, as though trying to comprehend what they had just heard. And Thomas looked pale, his hands twitching nervously at his sides. Richard wasn't finished. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, addressing the tables around us, "what you may not know is that Evelyn here runs her own design firm, one of the most promising in the industry. It's been an honor partnering with her on multiple developments. She is, without a doubt, a visionary." The room erupted, not in laughter this time, but in murmurs of shock and admiration. Guests leaned toward one another, whispering frantically. Faces that once looked at me with pity now carried awe. I simply smiled, calm and composed, saying nothing more. My silence was deliberate, powerful. The balance of the night had shifted in an instant, and for once, I wasn't the shadow in the room. I was the one everyone was finally seeing. The ballroom seemed to tilt on its axis the moment Richard Hale's words echoed through the microphone. "One of the most brilliant designers I've ever worked with." The clinking of champagne glasses halted midair, and every whispered chuckle from earlier was now replaced by sharp intakes of breath and a hum of disbelief. It was as though the very air in the room had shifted, crackling with a different kind of energy, respect, awe, and just a hint of shame. Evelyn sat gracefully, her back straight, eyes calm, as if she had expected this all along. She didn't need to smile or gloat. Her silence did all the talking. Around her, faces began to change. The same guests who had moments ago laughed at Thomas's cruel jokes were now glancing at her with widened eyes, murmuring apologies they didn't dare speak aloud. Thomas's face was a study in humiliation. His jaw slackened, his knuckles whitened around his champagne flute, and the confident smirk that had carried him through his speech had evaporated. He looked like a child caught misbehaving in front of the very authority figure he had sought to impress. Richard Hale was not just his boss. He was the man who could shape or shatter Thomas's career. And now, before the entire wedding hall, that man had shown deference not to Thomas, but to the sister he had mocked. Rachel, still in her gown and veil, stared at her new husband with eyes full of disillusionment. Her smile was gone, replaced with a shadow of regret. She had seen the way Thomas had belittled Evelyn earlier, and though she had kept quiet, the sting of his arrogance was clear on her face. Now, watching Evelyn receive praise from one of the most powerful men in their city, Rachel looked at Thomas as though she were seeing him for the first time, and she did not like what she saw. Richard, oblivious to the personal storm brewing at the head table, continued his praise. He spoke of Evelyn's innovative designs, her discipline, the way her firm had elevated projects that were now landmarks. "Your sister," he said, turning directly to Thomas, "is a visionary. The kind of professional I would entrust with anything." The whispers grew louder, rippling across the reception. Guests who had laughed earlier now avoided Evelyn's eyes, some shifting uncomfortably in their seats. A few offered tentative smiles in her direction, desperate to realign themselves with the power they had so quickly dismissed. But Evelyn remained unmoved. She neither basked in the attention nor offered consolation to her humiliated brother. Her restraint cut deeper than any words could. By refusing to gloat, she underscored just how small Thomas's attempt at humiliation had been. In that silence, Evelyn won. And Thomas knew it. Every second that passed, with the room now orbiting her instead of him, drove the dagger of his public humiliation deeper. And Evelyn, calm and radiant, didn't even need to lift a finger. The wedding had ended, but the tension still lingered in the air like smoke after a fire. Guests whispered as they left, casting side glances at Thomas, who had been so publicly humbled. Evelyn was gathering her things when she felt a firm grip on her arm. She turned and saw Thomas, his face flushed with anger, embarrassment, and desperation. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" he hissed, dragging her toward a quieter corner of the reception hall. "Why didn't you say you worked for Richard? Why let me look like a fool in front of everyone?" Evelyn looked at him calmly, her expression unreadable. "Because you never listened," she replied evenly. "And you never respected me enough to care. Every time I tried to talk about my work, you laughed. You turned me into a joke at family dinners. Why would I hand you the privilege of knowing something sacred to me?" Thomas's mouth opened, but no words came. For once, his arrogance had no defense. Their parents approached hesitantly, faces tight with unease. Their mother smoothed her dress, trying to fill the silence with something softer. "Evelyn, sweetheart," she began, "you have to understand, we only wanted you to be realistic. Design, it's a risky path. We didn't want to see you fail." Evelyn turned to face them, her voice steady but sharp. "No. What you wanted was control. You wanted me to fit into your idea of success, not my own. You doubted me because it was easier than supporting me. And now, when the truth is undeniable, you're trying to rewrite your intentions. I don't owe you that comfort anymore." Her father's jaw clenched. He had no rebuttal, just silence. For years, they had all dismissed her. Now their excuses rang hollow. Rachel, who had stood quietly nearby, finally stepped forward. Her eyes met Evelyn's, filled with something rare, humility. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I saw how they treated you, and I let myself believe it too. But tonight, seeing Richard praise you, seeing how you held your head high, I realize I married into arrogance. And I let it blind me. You deserved better from all of us." Evelyn gave a small nod, her expression softening just slightly. Rachel's words weren't enough to erase years of dismissal, but they carried sincerity that Thomas and their parents lacked. Thomas stood stiff, his ego unraveling thread by thread. He had always been the golden child, the one praised, the one expected to succeed. But now his own boss looked at him differently. Richard had seen his cruelty in real time. And that respect Thomas lived on, thrived on, had slipped into Evelyn's hands without her even trying. For the first time, Thomas realized his sister wasn't beneath him. She was far beyond, standing in a place he could no longer reach. And Evelyn, calm and resolute, finally let the silence speak for her. She didn't need their approval anymore. She had built her own crown. Weeks had passed since the wedding night that turned everything upside down. The same hall where Thomas once laughed at Evelyn behind a microphone seemed like a distant memory now. At first, Thomas basked in the glow of his marriage and his job, thinking he had embarrassed his sister for good. But it didn't take long for cracks to appear in his carefully curated world. At work, Richard, the CEO everyone respected, began to subtly shift. Where he once leaned on Thomas for reports, updates, and decisions, he now bypassed him entirely. Evelyn became his go-to. She was the one Richard called into boardrooms, the one he trusted with sensitive matters, the one he referred to as indispensable. For Thomas, each bypass felt like a slap, louder and more painful than the laughter he once aimed at Evelyn. His ego, once bloated, now thinned into something brittle. Meanwhile, at home, their parents' tone toward Evelyn changed almost overnight. Suddenly, she wasn't the dreamer with a failed career. She was their brilliant daughter, the one they told neighbors about with careful pride. They dropped Evelyn's name into conversations like a trophy, pretending as if they had always supported her. But Evelyn saw right through it. For years, she had been dismissed, belittled, and told she wasn't enough. Their newfound respect wasn't love, it was convenience. And she refused to play along. She answered their calls when she wanted to. She visited only on her own terms. When they tried to heap praise on her, she smiled politely but kept her distance. For Evelyn, the power wasn't in rubbing her success in their faces. It was in knowing she didn't need their approval anymore. Rachel, Thomas's new wife, was the one person who reached out with sincerity. Weeks after the wedding, she met Evelyn privately and confessed what she hadn't dared to say in front of the family. "I regret it. I regret marrying into this arrogance. You handled yourself with more strength and dignity that night than anyone else in the room." Her voice carried both admiration and sorrow, and for the first time, Evelyn saw that Rachel wasn't her enemy. She was trapped in her own choice. Evelyn didn't judge her, only listened. Through it all, Evelyn remained grounded. She didn't gloat when Thomas stumbled at work, didn't rub her parents' hypocrisy back at them, didn't bask in the quiet confession Rachel gave her. Her revenge wasn't in theatrics or cruelty. It was in patience. It was in knowing she had chosen self-respect over their expectations, and time had revealed the truth for her. One evening, as she closed her laptop after another successful project, Evelyn sat back and realized something profound. She didn't need to win arguments, didn't need to scream her worth. The truth had spoken for her. Walking away from her family's toxicity, she carried not bitterness, but peace. She had the last word without ever needing to say it. Do you believe Evelyn made the right choice by stepping back from her family and letting her success speak louder than words? Or should she have tried to rebuild those broken ties? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd really love to hear your perspective. And if stories like this resonate with you, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss another one.